Okay, well, I'm going to talk about different models of digital government and what that might mean for kind of our united aim of data science for government. Actually, this is a topic that I've been researching for a very long time, since the days when looking at the relationship between government and digital technology was really a very lonely and sad thing to do. And if somebody asked you at a party what you were working on, you knew you had about 30 seconds before they looked for somebody more interesting. But I wanted to mention it for a couple of reasons. I want to talk about politics and data, which is the subject of my most recent book there, our most recent book called Political Turbulence, and digital government itself, which was the subject of this book called Digital Era Governance, and the one that we're working on now. But also because of a series of studies that I worked on with Patrick Dunleavy from LSE and a research team from LSE, looking at the relationship between government and the internet, or government and the web, as the first study was called in 1999. And I mentioned that just because those were kind of policy analysis reports where we kind of gutted government and looked in depth inside government departments to look at what was going on with the web and the internet within those departments and how the relationship was developing. And I'll come back to that at the end, because I wonder if there's a possibility for doing something like that with data and data science. And it's something we're talking about at the Alan Turing Institute, where I'm a part-time faculty fellow. So we live a growing proportion of our lives on platforms of one sort or another. Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Google, Uber. I mean, I could go on forever just listing the sort of platforms where we entertain ourselves, shop, work, live, do everything, basically. And they're growing in number, and we're spending increasing amounts of time there. And on those platforms, we generate, we interact digitally, obviously. We generate huge quantities of data, which those platforms then use to make the services we use better. I've put better in scare quotes there because, of course, better for who? Better for us, ostensibly, but also better for the platforms themselves in terms of advertising, as Andy was talking about at the beginning, and so on, and making them more profitable. But what does that actually mean for politics, government, and policy making? What does that shift onto kind of platform life, as it were, mean for the subject of this conference? Well, thinking about social media, for example, a great deal of our political lives now are played out on social media. As people, for example, Facebook, for example, one of these, God, I don't know why it's doing that. Facebook, for example, is somewhere where by now around 3/4 of adults consume news from platforms like Facebook, and in so doing are invited to, say, share news items, to like something, to follow something, to retweet something if it's Twitter, or to sign a petition or join some sort of campaign. All the time, people are being invited to do those things, and they're being told what other people are doing. They're being given little bits of social information about what other people are doing, and they have the chance to become visible to all sorts of other people in terms of what they are doing. And that is shaping our political behavior in these environments. Now, what we do on platforms like this, those kind of activities that I've mentioned, are actually very, very small. They're little tiny acts of political participation. They may even seem, to many of you, may dismiss them as insignificant. But I mean, even something like sharing a photograph, like sharing this photograph, could actually have influenced both policymakers' views of what was going on and the lives of individual people looking for a new country, leaving war-torn Syria or Iraq, for example, this image of refugees in a German football stadium saying that refugees are welcome. So we're talking about very small acts of participation, But every time they're carried out, they send some kind of signal to other people in the environment that this is going on, and that may in turn influence their behavior. Now, I'm not going to talk in detail about that, but the point I want to get across here is just that these tiny acts of participation are drawing people into politics, people who perhaps don't traditionally have not participated in politics. And in some cases, they're scaling up to large-scale campaigns for policy change. Take petitions, for example. What this graph shows is that most petitions actually fail completely and don't go anywhere. 96% of petitions fail even to get 500 signatures. But a very small number, for example, in the UK, get over 100,000 signatures, which leads to a parliamentary debate, and in some way do form part of the agenda-setting environment, are something that policymakers need to think about. And obviously, if you want to know more about that, have a look at the or think more about that, have a look at the book Political Turbulence, and the argument is summarized there. But a key point is that politics that takes place on platforms generates large-scale, real-time, transactional data about what people think, about policy preferences, about political behavior, and social trends and social behavior more generally with political implications. And that's important because it's a whole range of new sources of data for policymaking. It's also important because it's changing the policymaking environment. It's making the policymaking environment more unstable in terms of large-scale mobilizations appearing as if from nowhere based on the accumulation of very small acts. It's making it more confusing because it's giving a huge range of expression to policy opinion, which policymakers have to confront. It's making it more unpredictable because change happens very quickly. We're not seeing a normal distribution of political mobilization. We're seeing a small number of extreme events and a large number of very small events, and that kind of distribution is harder to predict. It's making it more turbulent, and that's making policy making in many ways more difficult. But it's also generating large-scale data, and for these purposes, that's what's interesting. So there's data, for example, on the hashtags around, Black Lives Matter is one of them, but also around the other hashtags that have been used in campaigns against perceived racist policing in the US, on Facebook and Twitter, showing, again, this pattern of stasis and then a very extreme event. Here's we couldn't talk about politics without mentioning Brexit these days. This is the petition to rerun the EU referendum petition. Probably got more signatures than any petition ever. I don't know, 4 million signatures. Actually set up by a member of a right-wing organisation who was convinced that the Leave campaign were actually going to lose. Set up this petition that the referendum must be rerun if there wasn't a certain margin of victory. Was adopted by some of whom may be in this room, some of whom may be right here, afterwards in order to mobilise around the idea of rerunning the referendum. Again, any mobilisation like that generates data, data which we might do something, policy makers might do something with. There, for example, is that petitions data set that I showed you a minute ago, mapped over the whole country in terms of petitions either in favour of immigration or lobbying against further immigration in the UK. Huge amount of petitioning activity around this issue, thousands of petitions, and migration a key issue among them. The green areas the petitions are expressing support for immigration, the red ones supporting a ban on further migration, If you'd been trying to predict the Brexit result, you might well have done well to, across the country, you might well have done well to look at this data rather than to rely on opinion surveys, or even worse, betting markets, which really didn't have a very good outcome in terms of predictive capacity. There's some data. There's some data on people searching for universal credit, which is the major new benefit in the UK, showing the extent to which, showing where people end up when they try and find information about that benefit. Showing there in the middle, the big green peak, showing people looking for finding the site universalcredit.co.uk, which is actually not a government site, it's a private sector site, showing a useful bit of information for people in that department, that actually people are finding information from somewhere else other than the policy providers of that particular benefit. And another thing that political data, big data, as it were, provides, is that every time any kind of political platform, or a platform deliberately geared at civic activism or politics is changed, then that generates a kind of natural experiment in terms of what the data looks like before and after the platform change. And that's another opportunity, perhaps, for policymakers operating in this environment. There's the Petitions platform. Before it went, it's now run by Parliament, but before it was run by Parliament, that's the previous platform. It decided to introduce trending information on that platform without being very sure about what the implications of that would be. And the data before and after that change is able to show you, play back the effect of that change, in this case to concentrate attention, not to generate more petition signing, but to concentrate attention and signatures on the most popular petitions. Again, interesting information for those people delivering, making policy or delivering services in terms of how they design them in the future. So, as I said, that generates a turbulent policy-making environment. It also creates a number of pressures on policymakers to actually kind of towards kind of datafication, and as some people have started calling it, and data science. Why? Well, first of all, as I've just been trying to illustrate, a huge volume of digital information relevant for policy making is just being generated in society, and particularly by political activity. There's also major big data, data science potential in government itself, and that's the subject of this of a great deal of this conference, the idea that there's huge amounts of transactional data inside government that government has traditionally not been terribly good at using for making policy. There are also kind of competitive comparisons and expectations that people have about government. If they're used to operating on other sorts of platforms where, for example, the data that platform holds about them is maybe played back to them in some way, like your past transactions on Amazon or something like that, then people get the same expectations of government. They expect government to be able to do that. There's pressure for a kind of digital regulation or a digital of a kind of understanding of a database, data-driven understanding of digital activities when it comes to regulation and authority and control within the policy-making environment. If there's going to be a riot, for example, then that riot is going to be coordinated and organized digitally, and that's how policymakers are going to be able to predict it, should they aim to do that. If police break into a crystal meth den and work towards breaking it up and making a conviction, they're not going to find a neatly ordered kind of accounts ledger or a pile of paper which will tell them the clue to who's involved and what the operations of that den are. No, they're going to find a couple of mobile phones and a tablet maybe, probably encrypted, a technologically complex task to uncover, a data science task also to uncover what's going on. All those things point to a kind of platform model for government too, and the idea of a platform model of government has been touted ever since probably about 2009-10, when the US writer and commentator Tim O'Reilly wrote an article and a book chapter called Government as a Platform. It's been enthusiastically adopted, perhaps in part because of the association with Lego, and the idea that it was based on sort of building blocks, and it was going to make government more like Lego, which lots of people seem to think was a good thing. But in that article, he put forward a number. He put 7 kind of principles. These are the principles where he argued that if governments could adopt a kind of platform model, perhaps like an app store or something like that, then there would be lots of that would somehow allow government to operate or facilitate government's operation in a kind of data science type, in a data science world. And he put forward that before really the term big data even had currency, let alone data science. But it's been very enthusiastically kind of adopted by some governments and some kind of digital leaders across governments in terms of thinking about government. And I guess there's 2 governments where it's been taken to the greatest degree for different reasons. One of them is Estonia, where the term government as a platform is not, as I understand it, is not really, we have some Estonian people here, of course, some Estonian experts here, but I mean, it wasn't really used as an explicit expression, government as a platform. But perhaps Estonia has got nearer to it than any other country in the world in sort of developing a platform for government. The X-Road system of data registries, which ensures that every department and agency, only one government organization is able to hold one piece of data about a citizen. It's a very data efficient system, so data is only held once. Data is distributed across the government. There's no centralized system of data. There's a secure system of identification and a portal. It means that when people access government services, they can see who's accessed their data. To some extent, in some instances, they can control it. So it's a very secure system which preserves privacy in interesting ways. It's kind of designed for simplicity. These are the principles of Tim O'Reilly's 7 principles, which have really been emphasized. People can participate in it in that they have some control over their own data and who's been using it. And it's fulfilling this idea of leading by example, of government as an innovator, which we tend not to, in some ways, is counterintuitive. We tend to think of a lag between government and other spheres in terms of platform development, if you like. Whereas, in fact, X-Road is being, Finland, I think, is just coming to the end of having implemented the X-Road system as a piece of middleware between their existing digital government, and their interface. So it's a very kind of interesting example of government as a platform in practice. It does also illustrate some of the challenges for government to kind of participate in a platform society in data science terms. If you've got a system like this where everybody's data, where people know when somebody's used their data, when legally they have the right to know if some part of government has accessed their data, etc., then that rather works against the idea of being able to analyze that data in real time. Because citizens are supposed to know if someone accesses their data, it becomes more, the idea of doing data science with that data becomes more difficult. So it illustrates some of the contradictions that we are going to see as government starts operating in this way. In the UK, as many of you will know a lot about, we have a very different model. Of course, we have huge legacies in the UK. We have a complex network of legacy systems in every single department and agencies. And we don't have that benefit of having been able to implement something like X-Road, 10 years ago. We've never, as a government, been able to confront that challenge. We do have the new building blocks that are being developed at the moment: Verify, a system of federated identity, Notify, government pay, and we do have a government portal, .gov.uk, which has been kind of admired across the world, and people from other governments come to look at it. And we've developed a reputation for experimentation, for example, with and a kind of almost like hacking the state type culture within the government digital service, which has also been admired through the world. So I won't go on because there isn't time, but you can see very different models of this kind of government as a platform idea, which have implications for data science, plenty of implications for the kind of data science that would emerge in those in those two governments, and in any government that's kind of emulating or entering the platform society. One of the challenges are the kind of tensions and trade-offs. I'm sure it will come up again and again at this conference, the question of an ethical framework for data science for government. What are the ethical challenges to doing data science in government? But those are, and once you start trying to realize those challenges, I mean, Estonia is a good example of that. As I said, it's a kind of privacy-enhancing way of using data about citizens. And there's never been any kind of resistance against it. It seems to be very trusted. There isn't a massive kind of privacy backlash against that way of using data. But that can work against a kind of data science-driven innovation and efficiency. And finally is the question of what the data landscape looks like in government. One of the things we're talking about doing at the Alan Turing Institute, we're working on creating a kind of policy innovation hub where we might really think about how to get cutting-edge data science into government. I mean, one of the first tasks might be, just to go back to what I said at the beginning, of doing a kind of mapping exercise, of thinking about sources of data within government, about thinking of sources of expertise within government, and getting them talking to each other and understanding the data sources, because we don't have a platform in the sense that Amazon or Uber is a platform. We don't have that platform to start with. We've got to start understanding the kind of virtual, piecing together the virtual platform. Thinking about access to commercial data, the previous speaker talked about that. That's going to be crucial. We talk so gaily about all these sources of data, but when it actually comes to data we can get our hands on, we're talking about rather a different question. And both those things are going to vary enormously across sectors, across departments, across levels of government, often answered most easily at the city level, and kind of seemingly intractable at the central government level. And finally, we're going to have to think about kind of old and new data sources and how to link them together. And I think those methodologies are quite in their infancy. The idea of using our sort of traditional official collected statistics, which is what governments traditionally tended to do, and the great big surveys, but also policy analysts have tended to be reliant on, linking those kind of static, kind of custom-built data sources with the kind of data in the wild, so-called big data sources that many people here will be engaged in working out how to analyse. Stop there. Thank you.